What's up, everybody? Dan Wiederer at the Chicago Tribune, alongside Brad Biggs, also of the Chicago Tribune. We are here today to continue talking about the Chicago Bears offseason plans, progress. Brad, we've had a lengthy discussion about the quarterback position and the Bears' ongoing hunt to solve that riddle. But there's more here for this team than just solving the quarterback position and believing that you are ready to win at a high level and sustain a high level of success. And so I look at this, Brad, and I see these next 9 weeks from now through the end of the draft, with free agency, with the draft, with whatever trades and cuts the Bears need to make, as pivotal of a 9-week stretch as Ryan Pace and Matt Nagy have gone through together since they united in 2018, in big part because the pressure is so elevated and the margin for error is so thin, and every misstep will bring them closer to falling off that high wire, right, and plunging to their football deaths. And so as we look at this through a non-quarterback lens, I'm curious how you see the needs on this roster and the needs for Ryan and Matt to be almost error-free over the next 2 months here.
Well, they've got to get better in terms of protection, in terms of the offensive line, being able to open up holes in the running game, especially when when it's a rundown, when the defense knows it's going to be a running play. They've got to be a little bit better. And they made some real gains last year, and I think Sam Mustipher is a guy who stepped forward at the center position, who will likely enter as the starter at that position moving forward, which gives them the ability to keep Cody Whitehair at guard. You get a healthy James Daniels back. You got to figure out what you want to do at right tackle. They've got to get some more playmakers on the outside, though. They talk about needing to score touchdowns, needing to score more points. Well, I don't think the skill position players have been good enough. And while they've sort of, talked about the quality they have at these positions, I don't know. There's one or two things is going on here. Either they're not being honest with themselves, or they're painting the picture a little bit more pretty when they talk to us than when they have the closed door internal discussions when they review their roster and how it performs. Because you look at the wide receiver position, Allen Robinson, terrific. Okay. Need to bring him back. Fully expect him to get the franchise tag. Darnell Mooney had a nice rookie season. Let's not confuse his production for what the Vikings got from Justin Jefferson, right? I mean, huge difference. I think if you've got a really, really good offense, Darnell Mooney's your number 4 option going into the season. If you've got a good offense, he's your number 3 option. Right now, he's clearly their second. Anthony Miller has
become what we thought he would.
Has spun his wheels since his rookie season, right?
Yeah.
I mean, let's call it what it is. Riley Ridley, they won't give the guy a jersey on game days. Javon Wims had a lot of opportunities this past season, didn't do a whole lot. They need more skill position talent. They've got to do more to utilize Cole Kmet. So there's a lot going on there, and I think they need upgrades. Fortunately, it's a good draft for wide receivers. They ought to be able to find some help at that position for whoever ends up playing quarterback. But if you can get a little bit better on the offensive line, if you can get some more skill position talent, I think you've got a chance to achieve some of those goals that Matt is setting for this offense in terms of being more explosive, getting plays downfield, making it easier to get into the end zone.
We're talking about needing to score more points. We're talking about needing more playmakers. We're talking about needing some firepower from skill positions players. And obviously you mentioned Allen Robinson, because this is the one guy who is consistent, who is proven, who has played at a high level during his 3 years in Chicago, and you have him under your control. I think you and I are both in agreement that the Bears by March 9th will put the franchise tag on him. I think the hope would be to then sign him to a long-term extension. But what that franchise tag does for you is it gives you till mid-July to figure out a lot of the other things that we're talking about, and then be able to see a clear big picture of what you're looking at and say, okay, do we want to keep Allen Robinson under the $18 million franchise tag that we can force him to play on in 2021? Or can we afford X amount of money over that to make him happier, obviously, and to push this thing forward in the right direction? But it would almost seem like malpractice to do anything but use the franchise tag, given the control you have with that.
Yeah, what I've said for weeks now, probably more than a month, don't overthink this.
Yeah.
there's not a solution. You let Allen Robinson go into free agency.
That's a bye-bye.
He's not coming back. And then you've got to go out and spend a boatload of money to bring in a guy that potentially could be as productive as him. There's risk with that. There's a huge investment. I mean, what do you do when you go out and you sign a guy in the first 36 hours of free agency? You overpay, okay? So it's the franchise tag for Allen. Then you're buying yourself a little more than 4 months to potentially negotiate a multi-year contract. Listen, the sides were way apart when they talked last summer. I don't know that they can find some common ground to get a deal done. Allen has performed. He undertook the risk of playing through a contract year last season and played very well for the Bears. He's got comparables that he's looking at and saying, hey, this is what this guy's getting paid. This is where his production's been. This is where my production is. This is what I believe I deserve. And the Bears aren't there, or they haven't been there. Can they get there? Can the two sides come together? I don't know. I don't know that either side knows the answer to that question. It's business, though, and the Bears have got a pretty strong track record of being able to extend guys when the time comes. It doesn't work out for everyone, and all negotiations are different. They take on a life of their own. They head down a different path. But yeah, they've got to put the tag on him. They've got to keep him in place and then see if perhaps they can work something out.
Ryan Pace said Tuesday that we like to keep our good players. Allen is one of our good players. The assumption is they are going to do everything they can to keep Allen Robinson around. Business-wise, that 4-month bridge that you mentioned allows you to figure out other areas of your roster and then figure out what's left. The emotional side is you're going to be dealing with an unhappy Allen Robinson for an indefinite amount of time when you put the franchise tag on him. And so now you've got to navigate that as well. And you have to have a front office and a coaching staff and people that can get through to your top receiver in a way that keeps him connected, right? And keeps him from becoming disgruntled. And Allen has obviously always been a professional and a low-maintenance guy in that locker room, but it's still something you can't take for granted, and you have to make sure that you're at least keeping a pulse on that as well as you find your way to the end of this riddle, I guess.
Yeah, you've got to acknowledge that this is something that isn't going to sit well with the player, and you've got to be prepared to handle it. Allen, as you said, has been a consummate professional. There's no disputing that. If ultimately, what's his goal? His goal is to get a contract that he believes rewards him and pays him at a value that is equal to every nickel he thinks he deserves. So in order to achieve that, he's going to have to be on the field. He's not going to withhold his services. I can't see him sitting out. I mean, that costs him money in the long run then. So yeah, it's not going to be easy. Good luck finding the few players that are like, oh, okay, you want to tag me? Yeah, sure, go ahead. Those situations are not totally unheard of, but they're a little rare. Oftentimes they involve a player that, I'm cool with the tag because it's probably going to pay me more than I'd be getting otherwise. So we'll have to see. But the Bears, they really don't have any other choice here, and I'm sure Allen is more than smart enough to understand the situation they're in and the likely avenue this thing is headed down.
When we talk about this being a pivotal and significant 9-week stretch for Matt and Ryan, I think part of this comes down to the idea that this is going to be a very strange offseason in a lot of ways. And one of the ways it's going to be a strange offseason is with the reduced salary cap number coming down, at least $13 million from 2020, potentially up to $18 or $19 million below what it was a year ago. You're going to see some recognizable names thrown out on the street by their respective organizations who are trying to create cap space to make their roster, logistics work. And so Ryan mentioned on Tuesday that the Bears front office has to be ready to pivot and adapt to a lot of surprises and things that could pop up out of nowhere. And you say, well, wait a second, that guy's suddenly available. What can we pay him? And there's going to be sort of an eye-opening experience for some of these veterans of realizing that, hey, this isn't a normal year. We're coming out of the pandemic. The salary cap is way down, and you may have to settle for far less than you're worth, certainly far less than you think you're worth. And so it's going to create some interesting conversations, dynamics, and puzzles over the next 3 or 4 weeks that I think is going to be fascinating from our end to sort of monitor the developments.
Well, what you've seen for a long time now in the NFL is that the middle class has been getting squeezed. It's getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And so those guys that make, $4 to $8 million a year, that's a shrinking group. That teams are cool paying the elite players elite money, and then they like to have guys on rookie contracts or guys on minimum deals or deals that are close to the minimum. It is going to be an absolute buyer's market. It could be a bloodbath of sorts for some of these veteran players who find themselves cut. So there's going to be a glut of players out there, and it's going to be really interesting. And then, you've got to be able to recruit that player. You got to be able to sell them on a couple things. Hey, number one is going to be opportunity. If the offers are not what these players think they deserve, the next thing they're going to be looking at is, well, where can I go on a one-year deal to reestablish my market and maybe cash in 2022 when the salary cap is headed back up. So it's going to have to be a fit for the player to say, yeah, I could go to Chicago, be a starter, or play significant time. I think they've got a chance to compete, and that's a good spot for me. So, yeah, Pace, they've got to do their homework. All these teams have been in meetings. They're looking at the boards of all the other teams saying, who could be cut loose? And they've got a long list of guys.
Yep.
Are there going to be some surprises that maybe weren't on a lot of the list? Sure. But every team is going to be doing the same thing, and it's going to make really that secondary free agency market. It's going to be fascinating because the elite guys that get to March 17th are going to still get paid elite money, and after that, it's going to be teams sifting through the bargain bin, seeing what they can come up with. And the Bears have done a nice job finding guys like that during Ryan Pace's era. Even before that, they've done a pretty good job. Not all these guys they signed to, minimum deals come in and are smash hits, but not all of them are going to be. And we'll see what happens. But I expect them to be active. You got to consider a ton of options. And like I said, you're going to have to be able to recruit and sell the guy on, hey, yeah, we get it. It's a bad situation. You're getting a little bit of a raw deal, but look at the opportunity that you have to come here and play well and reestablish your market value.
Back to the origins of this conversation, when you look at this Bears team and you realize what's ahead of them here, obviously we acknowledge the top three lines of the two list are find a quarterback, find a quarterback, find a quarterback. But below that, there's a lot of work that's left to be done. As you mentioned, you need more talent and depth on your offensive line. You need more talent and depth in your receiving core. You had a rushing attack that, while it found its footing in late November and December, was still a bottom 10 rushing attack in 2020 in terms of total yards and yards per carry. You need to upgrade that a little bit. You have to figure out ways to get your defense to play at levels that it was playing at in 2018 when the sacks and the takeaways were coming at a much more frequent pace and a higher clip than they did in the 2 years under Chuck Pagano. And so that's a challenge for Sean Desai to try to put those pieces together and find some new additions that can help get those splash play numbers back to where they need to be for this team to be considered a championship contender. And so this list, Brad, it just gets long. We talked about Allen Robinson. You talk about salary cap constraints that they're going to be dealing under. You talk about going into 2021, about to play a schedule in which you have 8 games against teams that made the playoffs last year, including 6 of those on the road. And so really, when we talk about the Bears needing to have a realistic view of who they are and where they are, you have to understand that the climb from 8-8 to Super Bowl contender is ultra steep. And you can't just sort of try to convince yourself that, oh, hey, we played on wild card weekend, and so we're really close.
Yeah, although, I don't think George laid out Super Bowl contender as the criteria for Matt and Ryan being able to extend their careers at Hallis Hall. The word he used was progress. Can you go from 8-8 to
9-8?
9-8, 10-7, because there's going to be 17 games. That 17th game is going to be against the Vegas Raiders. I believe it's going to be in Las Vegas. I'll probably have to head out early for that road trip for work purposes.
Yeah, agreed.
So,
A lot of work to be done.
yeah, well, and I'm the man for that job specifically. So, yeah, they've got to get better. They've got to get better. I think you made a really good point earlier that, as you look at the work that's to be done, and again, what we've really got to evaluate is the moves they make, the actions they take, not what they're telling us. Let's evaluate action, not words, or evaluate action more so than words. But the margin for error is thin, I think, because they've got to get the quarterback better. They've got to make other moves on offense. They've got to make a couple key moves on defense to help Sean Desai out with personnel to make the gains that you talked about, getting back to being more disruptive, getting more takeaways, certainly getting the quarterback a little bit more. So a ton of work to be done. And so you hate to be kind of this Debbie Downer putting a black cloud over Hallis Hall.
It's a realist view.
But it's really going to be fascinating to see how this whole thing unfolds, because it is a giant puzzle, and all these little pieces have got to fit together in the end. And that's why you're talking about, I think one of them, it might have been Nagy alluded to it, they're talking about different scenarios and how things fit, because, if you go get this quarterback, you're talking about some other options here at other areas. I mean, it's every move is sort of going to touch in one way or another the other moves that they have forthcoming.
We talk about using critical thinking over wishful thinking, right? And that's the biggest deal for those up at Hallis Hall to try to get this thing back on the right track. The analogy I use, Brad, is like when you're driving through one of those really bad snowstorms and you can't fall into the belief of like, okay, we're steady here. If you loosen your grip on the steering wheel, if you take your eyes off the road for 1 second, now all of a sudden you're in the ditch and everyone's saying, boy, look at that poor sucker, wound up in the ditch, and that's where the Bears are. That's what it's like at 8-8 in this league. That's what it's like when you're trying to convince yourself that you're a contender, but you have a lot of work to do. So keep the hands on the wheel, headlights on, the wipers going. Make sure you keep your eyes on the road. I know you do that all the time.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Brad, as always, thanks for joining us. Happy to have these conversations. We're going to be even more happy when we have actual names of players acquired and released and traded for and traded out to discuss. But certainly the Bears will be making progress here in the near future, and we'll have a lot to talk about. Hopefully our audience will stick with us. Don't forget to click the subscribe button, like this video, do all those things that keep us able to bring you the content that you want. For Brad Biggs, I'm Dan Wiederer. Thanks as always for joining.